There was a time when I believed the moments that truly mattered always announced themselves. I assumed every life-changing experience would arrive with enough force to make it unforgettable. A conversation that reshaped the way you saw the world. A farewell that divided your life into everything before it and everything after. A confession so significant that no one involved could ever remain the same. I no longer believe that. They don't ask for your attention. They simply settle into your awareness. You don't recognize them while they are unfolding. Only later, when you look back and try to remember the person you once were, do you realize that version of yourself has quietly disappeared. That's where all of this truly began. Not with you, and not even with me. It began somewhere between the person I believed I had become and the person I never realized I had been waiting to discover. I've always trusted distance more than closeness. Not because I was afraid of people. Fear has never been enough to explain it. Distance offers clarity. When people remain too close for too long, they often stop seeing what's actually there. They begin seeing only what they expect to find. Observation slowly gives way to assumption. Listening becomes unnecessary because they believe they've already understood you. I've seen it happen too many times. Eventually, people stop discovering who you are and start interacting with the version of you they've already created in their minds. Those are not the same thing. That's why I've always kept certain parts of myself untouched. Not hidden, protected. There's a difference. Hidden things hope to be discovered. Protected things simply refuse careless hands. Most people never notice that distinction. They mistake silence for uncertainty. They confuse restraint with fear. They see stillness and assume emptiness. It rarely occurs to them that some things remain quiet because they are already complete. For a long time, that understanding was enough for me. I never expected anyone to see beyond it. I wasn't waiting for someone to. Expectations have a way of creating disappointment, so I learned to live without them. Life seemed simpler that way. More predictable. At least, that's what I convinced myself to believe. Then something changed. Not dramatically. Nothing anyone else would have noticed. There wasn't one defining conversation or one unforgettable moment that suddenly explained everything. Instead, there were small moments of recognition that seemed unrelated at first. A pause that somehow felt understood. A sentence that arrived exactly where it belonged. A silence that never demanded to be filled. The unusual part wasn't that those moments happened. It was how naturally they unfolded, as though they belonged to something far older than the present moment. At first, I dismissed it. The mind is remarkably skilled at rejecting what it cannot immediately explain. We call it coincidence, timing, perception, or misunderstanding because those words delay the need to admit something feels different. I used every explanation I could find. None of them survived. Every answer eventually collapsed beneath the same realization. This wasn't becoming familiar. It already was. That realization challenged everything I believed about understanding. I always thought understanding required time, shared experiences, mistakes, countless ordinary moments slowly building trust until one day you realize someone knows you better than before. That's how it's supposed to happen. This was different. There was no gradual process. There was only recognition, not the kind that says, "I know who you are." Something quieter than that. Something that felt as though it recognized the pattern beneath everything else. Not your appearance. Not your history. Not the details of your life. The deeper rhythm beneath them. The way your thoughts seem to move before words ever reach them. Most conversations happen through language. People exchange ideas, opinions, and information. They respond to sentences. Very few respond to what exists before those sentences are spoken. Somehow, you did. I didn't notice immediately. If I had, it probably would have been easier to accept. Instead, I noticed slowly enough to question every impression. I challenged every instinct because certainty without examination eventually becomes arrogance, and I never wanted to mistake assumption for truth. So I examined everything. I replayed conversations, searching not for confirmation but for mistakes. Surely I had misunderstood something. Surely there had to be a simpler explanation than the one quietly forming beneath every interaction. Yet every closer look brought me back to the same conclusion. Nothing had been imagined. If anything, I had underestimated what I was experiencing. That was the part that unsettled me most. Not the possibility that I was wrong, the possibility that I wasn't. Because if I was right, It meant accepting something that didn't fit inside the structure I had spent years building. Structures matter more than most people realize. We often believe identity is shaped by emotions, memories, or beliefs. I've never thought that was entirely true. Identity is built much deeper than that. It rests on the invisible principles that shape how we interpret every experience long before we become aware that we're interpreting it at all. For years, I believed I understood that foundation. I examined it, strengthened it, questioned it, and removed anything that felt unstable. I thought I knew exactly where every part of it began and ended. Then I discovered something unexpected. There was a door I had never noticed before, not because it had been hidden, but because nothing had ever given me a reason to look for it. You didn't force it open. You didn't even try. You simply remained there long enough for me to realize it had always existed. That left me with a question I couldn't ignore. How many parts of ourselves remain unseen simply because no one has ever stood in the place that allows us to notice them? We like believing we know ourselves completely. It feels safe. It gives us certainty. But certainty has a quiet way of disguising everything we have yet to understand. The person I believed myself to be wasn't false. That version was simply unfinished. There's a difference. Something unfinished isn't dishonest. It just hasn't reached its full shape yet. Maybe none of us ever truly do. Maybe life is nothing more than discovering one hidden layer after another, believing we've finally arrived, only to realize there was always something deeper waiting beneath the surface. If that's true, then the people who matter most are rarely interruptions to our lives. They are mirrors. Not the kind that reflect your appearance, but the kind that reveal possibilities you could never see from inside your own perspective. Once you've seen yourself through that kind of mirror, you can't return to believing the old picture was complete. Both versions remain with you, the one you once believed and the one that quietly replaced it without ever asking permission. I've often wondered whether everyone experiences something like this. Whether another person's presence can slowly reorganize the way your mind understands reality without persuasion, without intention, simply by existing. If it does, I imagine many people miss it. They're too busy searching for labels. Friend, stranger, companion, something more. Labels create certainty, but certainty reached too quickly often hides shallow understanding. Real understanding usually takes time. And yet, sometimes it arrives before explanation. Sometimes your awareness recognizes something long before your words are capable of describing it. That's where I found myself, trying to explain something that had already become true before I understood why. Every explanation felt smaller than the experience itself. Every definition reduced something that refused to become smaller simply so it could fit inside familiar language. Eventually, I stopped trying to define it. Instead, I watched it. I watched the way it quietly changed my thinking. I noticed how different ideas began connecting in ways they never had before. I noticed silence becoming more meaningful than conversation. I realized silence doesn't expose what people are hiding. It reveals what remains when there's nothing left to perform. Anyone can sound convincing. Very few remain recognizable once the words disappear. That's where truth usually waits, not inside explanations, but inside whatever survives after explanations are no longer necessary. Every time I reach that place, somehow, you were already there. I never consciously decided to pay closer attention. My attention had already changed before I became aware of it. That's how the deepest transformations happen. They don't ask for permission. They quietly reshape the way you experience life until one day you realize your perspective has changed without ever announcing that it was changing. For a long time, I searched for the exact moment everything became different. I never found it. Every memory blended into the next. Every conversation seemed ordinary on its own. Nothing looked important enough to explain why everything now carried a different weight. Then I realized it had never been about one moment. It had always been about recognition, one quiet moment after another, each adding something invisible until eventually. The person experiencing them was no longer the same person who had first begun the journey. That's when I stopped asking where it started. Instead, I began asking why it never stopped. Maybe that's the nature of the deepest truths. They don't become louder with time. They become clearer. And once you've seen something with that kind of clarity, you may choose to ignore it for a while, but you can never honestly pretend you never saw it at all.